The NFL season is right around the corner, but before we get there, here are 5 moves that I believe need to happen. The first move being Maxx Crosby being traded to the Philadelphia Eagles, and the process that I'm going to go through is give a trade package if that is necessary, give the why for both teams, and then give you my version of, as an NFL fan, what would make the NFL better seeing this trade happen. Now, Maxx Crosby to the Philadelphia Eagles, I do believe that Maxx Crosby should just in general be traded, right? The Vegas Raiders were willing to move off of him earlier this offseason in a deal to Baltimore, fell through because of medicals, but at the end of the day, we kind of know where this team's direction is for Vegas, moving on without Maxx Crosby, and Maxx Crosby is a very sought-out alpha edge rusher that I do think as we get closer to the season, it does make sense for him to be moved, and I think an NFC team probably makes a ton of sense. I landed on Philadelphia, but you could make an argument for Chicago, Detroit, San Francisco, Green Bay, maybe Dallas, but there's a couple of reasons I landed on Philly over those teams. Number one, Philly has one of the more aggressive general managers in the sport in Howie Roseman. Number two, the fit for some of the teams I don't think quite makes a ton of sense. Green Bay and San Francisco specifically. I do have other trades for those teams in this video, so I'm going to get a little bit more into why those trades make the most sense at that time. For Detroit, Brad Holmes just hasn't been a really aggressive general manager in the trade market. They have an alpha edge rusher in Aiden Hutchinson. I think it's much more likely that they go for a supplemental option rather than Maxx Crosby. Whether Lions fans agree or disagree with that, that's just kind of the reality of how I see it. The Bears, Ryan Poles, I do think you can make a very strong case, and if you put, gun to my head between two teams, it would be the Bears and Eagles, but ultimately I landed on Philly because I think, one, Howie Roseman has a little bit more track record of just getting things done, and two, I believe that Philly has the better trade package. That package to me is Maxx Crosby going to the Philadelphia Eagles for Nolan Smith, the New England 2028 first that they just got in the A.J. Brown deal, and a 2027 fourth round pick. Philly has an ability to offer a haul in terms of, decent draft capital, really good draft capital, and a young player that is worth extending for the Vegas Raiders and fits their timeline at the position of need. We just saw something similar happen in the Myles Garrett deal. Obviously, that deal was bigger than this one, but we saw Jared Verse go back to Cleveland because Cleveland had a spot to fill. They wanted to bring in a young asset, kind of following a similar formula here for Philadelphia, right? Why would you move off of a first round pick, a fourth round pick, and a young promising player in Nolan Smith, who 2 postseasons ago had a tremendous run in their Super Bowl window? Well, because the arms race in the NFC is obviously building up, and there's 2 more NFC trades that I even think could happen here, but NFC teams are stockpiling assets in an effort to keep up with the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams this offseason went and got 2 major star defensive players in Trent McDuffie and Myles Garrett. Philadelphia moved off of A.J. Brown. They need to fill out this roster. They need to make impact moves. And yeah, you could have made a case for a Budda Baker coming here. You could have made a case for Philly trading for a premier offensive player, but Maxx Crosby is a player that fits the Philly system. This team under Howie Roseman as general manager has always prioritized the trenches. They're pretty set offensive line-wise, and you could argue that they are set on the defensive line with Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Nolan Smith, Jalix Hunt, and you brought in Jonathan Grenard. You could argue that that has them set, but I would argue that Philly is never set on the defensive line. This has been a team that's always been hyper aggressive in bringing in pieces, and having an edge rotation of Maxx Crosby, Jonathan Grenard, Jalix Hunt, and then some young developmental pieces is a really good way to, one, have a ton of depth, but 2, keep your defensive line fresh. In the most recent 2 Philadelphia Eagles Super Bowl, their defensive line has been what? 7, 8 guys deep? They have run on rotation and freshness, and that's where a lot of their impact has come from. Maxx Crosby, obviously, is one of the best edge rushers in football. I think no doubt top 10 to plenty top 5. That would be huge for them. And again, they're looking to compete with not just the Rams, but Seattle, who just won the Super Bowl, San Francisco, who beat them in a playoff game. Chicago's getting better. Green Bay's getting better. Detroit's going to be back to prominent. Dallas in their own division's getting better. Like, there is a lot of high-level teams in the NFC that this offseason added talent and may continue to add talent, whereas Philly subtracted it, man. Like AJ Brown, I get that the trade had to happen, but at the end of the day, what's going to help you win more this season? AJ Brown or a 2028 first round pick? Obviously, the answer is AJ Brown. So Philly, to me, to stay viable in the NFC, to be in that top tier of teams with the Rams and with Seattle, has to make a move like this. And again, it fits Philly's narrative. For the Raiders, why would they do it? I think it's really simple, right? Maxx Crosby is a guy that the Raiders already looked to trade this offseason. They already traded him once this offseason. That trade did not go back because the Raiders regretted it. That trade went back because Baltimore saw something in the medicals and sent it back, which is whatever. But the Raiders clearly decided that their timeline did not fit Maxx Crosby, and they spent a lot of money this offseason vastly overpaying Linderbaum at center, which I get that you needed it, and it was fine to overpay in the sense of you got your running back on a rookie deal, your quarterback on a rookie deal. Overpaying the center to make both of those guys better makes a ton of sense, but you spent money that you thought you were getting off of in the Maxx Crosby situation. Now, if you do this deal, Nolan Smith at 25, you can get at a cheaper number and still develop him to being one of the best edge rushers in football because we've seen those flashes before, and you add some additional draft capital on top of it. To me, it's a deal that makes sense for the Raiders. Again, the Raiders already traded Maxx Crosby once this offseason. Them trading him isn't crazy. Nolan Smith already played with Nakobe Dean. We've seen those guys be key pieces as a part of a Super Bowl defense already in their young careers. The Raiders rebuilding a defense, having those two young guys on there on cheaper contracts, I think would be really solid. And now my pitch to you as an NFL fan why this deal is good. The Raiders, they get younger, they get their rebuild going, and the NFC adds one more star-studded powerhouse team. Philly, the Rams, Seattle. And I have two more trades that would make the NFC have two more star-studded teams. At the end of the day, when we see playoff football, when we see the big games, we want to see the best players out there. That's why we're excited about Myles Garrett being traded to the Rams. Myles Garrett's entire career has been spent on the Cleveland Browns in low-impact, low-leverage games. Yes, Myles Garrett's been awesome, and yeah, when he broke the sack record, that was a high-leverage spot, but the guy's been in a couple of playoff games and never on a real Super Bowl contender. Now he is. The same argument could be made for Maxx Crosby. Maxx Crosby's been on some high-leverage games for the Raiders. He's been in a playoff game, but Maxx Crosby's never been on a team that we thought, yeah, they could win the Super Bowl. Getting him to Philly and getting the best players on the best teams creates the best product. Maxx Crosby to Philly, man. Let's make it happen. In another deal that sees edge rusher movement, I think that the Green Bay Packers should trade for Josh Sweat from the Arizona Cardinals. I think Josh Sweat for a 2027 third-round pick is a deal that makes a ton of sense. From the Packers' perspective, they moved off of Kenny Clark and Rashawn Gary in the last two off seasons. Their defensive line, yes, it has Micah Parsons, but it does need some depth to it, and Josh Sweat as a Robin to Micah Parsons, Batman as an edge rusher is an excellent move. You could make the case for the Packers to trade for Maxx Crosby, but the additional draft capital that I think it would take to get Crosby over Sweat doesn't quite make sense for Green Bay for a couple of reasons. One, Green Bay has proven an ability to be a well-drafting team. They can draft and develop guys. That's why they've stayed consistently good for so long. Losing high leverage draft picks again after you already lost some in the Micah Parsons deal doesn't feel like the business that Green Bay would be a part of. But number two, you already have Batman. On your edge rushing group, you already have one of the 5 best edge rushers in football. And yeah, 2 top 5, 2 top 10 guys isn't a bad thing, but when you already have it, I think it creates less of a need to really push all the chips in on that position. You'd rather spend a little bit less and have more draft capital to build out the rest of the team as needed going forward. And Josh Sweat is a really good fit, man. Putting him next to Micah Parsons, we've seen Josh Sweat excel at a very high level. In that Super Bowl a couple of years ago versus Kansas City for Philadelphia in the biggest game, this man had, what was it, 2.5, 3.5 sacks, something like that. He damn near could have been Super Bowl MVP in that blowout. He was probably a top 5 candidate for it in that spot. And Micah Parsons, reports are starting to say he's going to miss the first half of the 2026 season. And I do think it's genuinely worrying for Green Bay to not have Micah Parsons out there for 8 weeks in a very loaded, very stacked NFC North, which when Micah Parsons didn't play at the end of last year, Green Bay went 0-4 and lost in a playoff game. They were winless without Micah Parsons last year. So not having Micah at the beginning of the season can be detrimental to that defense, especially when you start to consider losing Jeff Hafley. However, if you bring in a Josh Sweat, who I don't think he's a Batman for the long term, but for the first 2 months of the season, I believe Josh Sweat could hold down the fort for Green Bay, especially when you consider that Green Bay's new defensive coordinator is Jonathan Gannon, who was the former defensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles, and he already has history with Josh Sweat. Then, at the end of the season, 2026 ends, Green Bay's in the playoff race, you get Micah Parsons back, and all of a sudden you have one of the premier defensive lines in football. To me, makes a ton of sense for Green Bay. That's why it's so heavily rumored. The Cardinals, why? Well, the Cardinals are clearly one of the teams that are just very much so eyeing the 2027 draft, and I don't blame them. But at the end of the day, when you can move kind of a more older veteran piece of your defensive line to get additional draft capital for 2027, which is a loaded draft, that makes a ton of sense to me. Whether you want to stick and pick at that spot and just acquire as much talent in this 2027 draft as possible, or you want to have additional draft capital to fire and move up to get your guy, whether that's Arch Manning or somebody else, you have the pieces to do so now. At the end of the day, is Josh Sweat a highly productive player? Yeah, he had 12 sacks last year for Arizona. He was very productive, and their defense would certainly miss him this year. But at the end of the day, if you're being a realist, you have to take a look at yourself and say, in this NFC West with the Rams, Seattle, and San Francisco, do we have a shot in hell of competing in 2026? The answer is no for Arizona. The offense might be fun, it might be flashy, it might have some fun games where, oh my God, did you see that? The Cardinals put up 40 points last night. That certainly could happen, and those are things to build off of, but ultimately, the Cardinals will not be competing until 2027. Getting additional draft capital for a player like Josh Sweat makes the most sense to me, and then again, as an NFL fan, seeing the best teams get the best players makes it all the more competitive. The AFC, that is the conference of quarterbacks, right? With Mahomes and Allen and Lamar and Herbert, etc., Drake May, like that is quarterback duel central. But the NFC has been the conference of rosters, man. The Rams, Seattle, Philadelphia, Green Bay, and the Packers being able to add another premier edge rusher that can get double-digit sacks after losing a Rashawn Gary, losing a Kenny Clark, that to me makes the NFC North all the more interesting, especially if Micah's going to be out, because to be honest, without Micah Parsons and without a Josh Sweat, I'm probably going to pick the Packers to miss the playoffs. And it's not because I don't think that the Packers are a playoff worthy team, but it's because not having that defensive line production for 2 months in this division with the Lions, the Bears, and I think a re-emergent Vikings team that will have far better quarterback play than it had last year could spell death to Green Bay and their hopes of getting to the playoffs. Even though come the second back half of the season, they might be the best team in this division, it's possible they start too slow out the gate with the lack of defensive production unless they get a guy like Josh Sweat. Number 3 is a free agent move, but I believe Tyreek Hill should head back to the Kansas City Chiefs. There's no real trade package to break down here, obviously, as it's a free agent move, so it's kind of like, why is this a good thing for both sides? For Tyreek Hill, I think it's pretty obvious. Kansas City is a place where he had a ton of success. Kansas City is a place where he is familiar with. He's played under Andy Reid. He's played with Patrick Mahomes. He's played with Travis Kelce. And coming off of a pretty gruesome injury, I do think Kansas City is a spot where Tyreek can perform very well this upcoming season and then potentially earn himself a big contract for the following year, right? Tyreek Hill probably is past the prime of getting massive contracts, but we just saw Mike Evans get like a 3-year, what was it, $75 million contract. Tyreek Hill could easily get that if he had a productive 2026 campaign. Now, Kansas City doesn't have a ton of money to play with. They can restructure contracts, push money back, and find a way to give Tyreek Hill some decent money. But at the end of the day, Tyreek would likely be taking a pay cut to play in Kansas City. But like I mentioned, for the reasons I said, I think it's 1 step back for 3 steps forward for Tyreek Hill, and he can compete for a Super Bowl, which he's probably missed doing after being in Miami for so long. The why for Kansas City might be one of the easiest whys possible. It is a low risk, very high reward move for Kansas City. If you commit, $7-8 million to Tyreek Hill for this year, and he's just not the player that he once was, then he falls into that wide receiver room that you have that's already full of fast guys that aren't high impact players. Xavier Worthy, Tyquan Thornton, you had a Hollywood Brown. Like, Tyreek Hill, probably at his worst, is just one of those dudes. But if Tyreek Hill is back to who he was, then we've seen Kansas City have some of the best offenses in NFL history with Mahomes, Hill, and Kelsey. And yeah, that was at the time where Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelsey were in their prime. So am I saying we're going to get back to those Kansas City Chiefs days? No, but Kansas City clearly needs a jolt offensively. That's why they brought Eric Bieniemy back. But is that enough? I don't know. But if you add in the fact that they'd have Kenneth Walker and it'd be more of a two-dimensional offense, I think you could get, even if Tyreek's 85% of what he was, and even if Kelsey's 85% of what he was a couple of years ago, one of the best Kansas City offenses there is. And after Mahomes coming off the torn ACL, this is a guy that you don't want to be mobile. Like, at least you don't want to have to force him to be. Last year, he had to lead the team in rushing over several games just for the offense to be productive. And yeah, they added in Kenneth Walker, but is that enough? Is that enough for a Kansas City offense that struggled multiple times last year? A quarterback, 31 years old, coming off of a torn ACL. Is that enough to compete in the AFC, in which, with Mahomes healthy or with Mahomes not healthy, they were going to miss the playoffs last year? I don't know. But I'll tell you what, I'd feel a lot better if I was Kansas City with Tyreek Hill. And now the why as an NFL fan. Convincing NFL fans that the Kansas City Chiefs should get better is probably one of the harder things I've ever done. But number 1, rule of cool. Who doesn't love nostalgia, man? Kansas City Chiefs, Mahomes, Reed, Kelsey, Tyreek Hill, one last ride. It'll have a Last Dance-esque feel to it, even though it's not the last dance for Mahomes. I think he's going into that second era. We talked about that, but it would still be awesome. Number 2, like I mentioned, the AFC is the conference of quarterback play and offensive play. Seeing Mahomes with those weapons go up against a Justin Herbert twice this year with Mike McDaniel and Omarion Hampton fully healthy and a healthy offensive line, going up against a Bo Nix in his division twice this season that won 14 games last year. Lamar Jackson back to healthy. Josh Allen with DJ Moore now as a weapon. CJ Stroud with a, built offensive line. Drake May now with AJ Brown. These offensive matchups that we have the potential to see would feed families. These would be fantastic games. Mind you, there is a Chiefs-Rams game on the schedule in the last month of the season this year. We know what Chiefs-Rams is capable of. If you know, you know. That Monday Night Football banger. I'm just saying, the potential Kansas City shootouts with Cincinnati, Buffalo, Baltimore, the Chargers makes things very interesting. As much as we all, that aren't Chiefs fans, can root against Kansas City at times, football is more interesting. Any sport's more interesting with a dynasty, with a villain to root against. Kansas City being good, but not good enough to win, is kind of the sweet spot, and maybe Tyreek Hill gets them there. Number 4, man, Denzel Ward to the San Francisco 49ers. I haven't seen this be talked about at all. I don't know if I'm the guy launching this take here or if you've seen it somewhere else. If so, let me know. But this is a deal that I think makes a ton of sense for both sides. I think Denzel Ward for a 2027 second round pick could be the move here. For the why for San Francisco, The 49ers currently have the most cap space of any NFL team. They moved off of the Brandon Ayuk contract. They were able to get that money voided. They gave some of it to Mike Evans, but that was a big time deal that Ayuk got. They have money to spend. And a lot of people are suggesting that they should add a premier player on the defensive line. People have suggested Josh Sweat, Maxx Crosby. Personally, I don't see the defensive line as the biggest need for this San Francisco defense. I get it that it wasn't great last year, but you have to factor in some of the injuries that happened and some of the roster moves that they've already made. Nick Bosa will be back. Mykel Williams, who was a first-round pick from last year, will be back. Alfred Collins was really solid, and this team already traded for Odighizuwa from the Cowboys. Like, the defensive line in San Francisco is actually in a pretty good spot, especially when you factor in the linebackers behind them are Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw to clean up some of those rushing lanes. Like, San Francisco is in a pretty good spot with their defensive line and their front seven. It's actually their secondary that I think needs a little bit more work. And adding in a top 10 corner in Denzel Ward to me makes a ton of sense. Denzel Ward would come in and be the alpha cornerback one in this room and would put guys in a better spot. I like Diamador Lenore, but is he much better served off as a CB2? Yeah, he's a big physical corner who can hold his own against wide receiver ones, but would probably look really dominant against wide receiver twos. You have Malik Mustafa in that secondary. You have Green as well, who could play nickel. And ultimately, adding Denzel Ward, one, gives you a premier high-level corner to go up against Puka Nacua and JSN twice a year. By the way, like, San Francisco is in a different league. They're looking to compete with arguably the two best teams in football in their division twice in this season as they try to get to the playoffs. Kyle Shanahan was a miracle worker for being able to get there last year, but ultimately, if they have the same injury failure that they had last year, I don't see a world where they can repeat that. That was a once in a lifetime coaching situation, and I think it should have won him Coach of the Year. It's kind of a shame that it didn't, personally, in my opinion. But ultimately, getting healthy and adding a premier player to this defense in Denzel Ward would put San Francisco in that top tier with the Rams and with Seattle. I mean, to me, they're a tier behind right now. And it's not to say that they can't outperform it, because obviously Kyle Shanahan can outperform things like that, but you want to be in that tier roster-wise. Having the offense that they have with Purdy and McCaffrey and Kittle, he'll be back. Trent Williams will be back. Mike Evans, Pearsall, like a ton of dudes there. And Shanahan being a maestro with the plays. And then a defense that has an elite player at every level. Bosa, Warner, Ward. All of a sudden, you could damn near argue for San Francisco over the Rams or the Seahawks. I'm not saying I would, but you could. This is a big time move that, I'm not going to lie, if the price was a 2027 first, I'd even consider it then. I'd need a kickback of like a fourth or a fifth or something. But if it's a second, I'd do this deal in a minute if I was San Francisco. For Cleveland, why? You just moved off of Myles Garrett. You have admitted to yourself that's not happening. The window's not happening. We got to reset. We got to rebuild again. A 29-year-old corner doesn't fit the timeline for Cleveland. If anything, Myles Garrett more so fitted the time. Corner is, by many standards, the hardest or second hardest position to play in the NFL. And you have to have peak athleticism to keep up with these dudes. And there's just more great wide receivers coming. Jeremiah Smith's coming in this draft class. There's just more and more high-level athletes that are playing that position because it gets paid so much. So you have to be really on top of your athletic abilities at corner to stay premier. And Denzel Ward, I believe, can do that, but the Browns probably aren't going to be a Super Bowl contender for 3 years down the line at best. 32-year-old Denzel Ward, I'm not so sure. And similar to Arizona, who we talked about earlier, the Browns are one of the few teams that I think you look at the 2027 draft and you say, the Browns are looking to make moves. The Browns, the Jets, the Dolphins, and the Cardinals. Those are four teams that I think you look at the 2027 draft and you say, those teams are already looking ahead to that draft. And they are. And for Cleveland, you got to haul back in the Myles Garrett deal. You have a ton of ammo to move up if you wanted. But why not move up and have a ton of capital to make selections? Why not build your entire foundation over the next 2 draft classes? Add in a second-round pick for a player who isn't going to help you. This is a deal that makes a ton of sense to me for both sides, which is why I'm surprised that I haven't seen it mentioned. And the why, I'm beating a dead horse here, beating the drum, but let's get some better players on some better teams. Myles Garrett just left the Browns for the Rams, and we're all happy for Myles because he's going to play in some high leverage games. Well, how about the same deal for Denzel Ward, man? Denzel Ward playing in high level football games in NFC West battles. Getting to see him go up against JSN and Puka twice a year would be amazing. Getting to see Denzel Ward in a divisional playoff game opposite side Myles Garrett. Rams 49ers. How you doing? This would make the NFC West arguably one of the best divisions in NFL history, with perhaps the three best teams in the NFL in one division. Give me San Francisco improving. Give me San Francisco adding Denzel Ward. And then the last move that I have here, a little bit of like a smaller step down move, but give me Deebo Samuel to the Chargers, man. This could be Stephon Diggs or Deebo Samuel. I think one of those veteran wide receivers. You can make a case for Tyreek Hill, but I already said Tyreek Hill to Kansas City. So give me Deebo Samuel here to the Chargers because of his connection with Mike McDaniel. But a lot of the points you could certainly substitute Stephon Diggs in. For the Chargers, why? They do have a ton of money right now, so giving a one-year deal to a veteran wide receiver who, listen, we saw it with Stephon Diggs last year. Like, he made a very high impact with the Patriots. He had multiple big games, multiple big catches, and I think was a top 20 receiver in terms of yards production, and they were able to get off the deal after 1 year. So taking a shot on a veteran wide receiver in a year where you think you're ready to compete. I mean, the Patriots made a Super Bowl. I think the Chargers at the high end this year, you could argue the same deal, makes a ton of sense. And I don't think it would really disrupt the flow of their offense. You'd probably play Deebo 50% of the snaps, take a pullback there. That way you can get him fresher legs and get him to stay healthy throughout the course of a season. You still have Lad McConkey as your wide receiver one. They signed David Njoku. You have QJ on the outside, and you still have Amari and Hampton back there. But letting Mike McDaniel be creative with certain Deebo Samuel snaps, whether it's out the backfield, in the slot, or, line them up next to McConkey and let those guys both go to work as route runners. We saw it with Keenan Allen last year. They had some really productive moments together. Justin Herbert kind of just needs as many weapons as he could get. So to me, the Chargers taking a flyer on Diggs or Deebo does make a ton of sense. My why, again, the AFC, it's for high-level offenses. The Chargers looking to compete with potentially Kansas City getting back Tyreek Hill. The Bengals at full strength with an improved offensive line. And the Bengals, I think, are going to be really good this year, man. The Ravens, who added a new offensive coordinator in pieces. The Bills, who added in DJ Moore. The Patriots, who added in A.J. Brown. This is a move that I think, I don't want to say, oh my God, Deebo Samuel's worth the same as A.J. Brown, because that's not the case. But the Chargers just kind of making a move to remind everybody, like, hey, like, we're here, and 2027 is a year that we're able to compete. Would be a fun thing to do, a fun, dependable veteran piece that has experience with McDaniel and you could use in a variety of creative ways. I'd absolutely be here for Deebo Samuel to the Los Angeles Chargers. So those were 5 pitches for NFL moves that need to happen. Which did you agree with? Which did you not agree with? Be sure to let me know in the comment section down below. If you think I missed any move that player this, X player should go to this team, let me know that in the comment section as well. We are really closing in on 700 subs, so I appreciate all of your guys' support. If you're not yet subscribed, I'd really appreciate if you hit that button for football conversations like this. I will catch you next time. Peace.